This is Dr. Eugene Lipov. He is a groundbreaking doctor who has combined, and please correct me or put some finesse on it if need be, but he has combined different modalities, ketamine, which I'm a big fan of, although I haven't experienced it yet myself, SGB, which I haven't spoken about on the show, stellate ganglion block, and psychiatry. He's put this together and can't wait to do a deep dive on this and really share this with the audience. Dr. Lipov, thanks so much for being here, man.
Thank you. It's an honor.
You're a good man. I don't care what Devin Laird says.
Well, his judgment of character.
Well, so that's how I got on how you got on my radar is through Devin Laird, the world famous arm wrestler and JTF2 veteran. I only met the guy once. Very, very nice fella, very humble fella. He served in my regiment, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, for a couple of years, then the Royal Canadian Regiment for a couple of years, and then finished off his career with the Elite Special Forces Tier 1 unit. And he was saying that you're quite well known in the Special Forces community. How did that come to be? Like, how did you become the man with Special Forces?
Well, first of all, it's absolute honor to be on your show, and then
thanks.
Special Forces, SOF, have been amazing, just an amazing experience. So let me, if I may, let me just give you a kind of broad overview, because a lot of people, I think, are interested. It's like, why would this goofy anesthesiologist have any reason to interact with Special Forces? It's like, why the interest and why does things happen? So, so to give you a backdrop, so my father was in World War II, and the quadrant was dropping bombs on German ships, and German ships didn't like that. So out of 10,000 people, 100 made it home. So he had severe PTSD. So I'm very familiar with PTSD from the military and how it affects the family, because it affected me. I had secondary PTSD. My mother had PTSD, and then she eventually took her life. So that's why I'm interested in PTSD in general, women, and military. So the first soldier or SF gentleman that was treated in Chicago by me 17 years ago. So this gentleman was in Iraq patrolling the street, and a 10-year-old kid was sent down to take him out. He's squad out. So he shoots the child, piece of child hit him, come home, horrible circumstance. We treated him 17 years ago. He's still doing well, which is pretty amazing, I think.
So let's talk about SGB by itself. From what I've heard and researched, and just listening to people that treat with SGB, which is stellate ganglion block for the listeners, typically it lasts for 9 months to a year, and then they got to get a new shot of it. That's what I've been hearing anyway. But with the way that you do it, though, are you finding that the results are more or less permanent?
Well, so there are 2 or 3 questions in that question. If you don't mind, let me bundle it apart.
Oh, yeah, please.
Keep in mind, I'm used to writing medical literature, so I'd like to give very specific answers.
Sure.
So, so stellate ganglion block's been around since 1926. I've been doing it personally since 1987. So standard stellate ganglion block used to be just right side, one level. So I have moved it to a different level. We do 2 sites, 2 different places in the neck. And I can tell you the story behind how that came to be. That seems to give it more efficacy and less longer. So what Devin had and many SOF people are receiving when I treat them, the term I use is SOF method. So that's becoming hopefully a standard term. I presented at the conference this year. So that's a combination of ketamine and the new version of SGB is called DSR, dual sympathetic reset, because we do 2 levels. And what it turns out to be is that ketamine does some very good things, which you alluded to, you understand some of it. SGB or DSR does very good things. Together, they're synergistic. As far as how long things last, stellate itself can last for years. It depends on three things: genetics, what kind of work you do afterwards. Do you do psychotherapy? Do you take care of yourself? Do you meditate? Do you do yoga? Things like that prolongs it. The other thing, what happens in your life? Like, we took care of a Chicago Police Department member, and he had to shoot he was doing great for a year. He had to shoot somebody in line of duty 1 year later and came back. He had to come back. But the combination of ketamine and SGB or DSR seems to last significantly longer. So far, we have one paper came out in SOF method, a year follow-up. We're actually writing a paper on 2-year follow-up in the same gentleman, and he's still doing amazing. And he was, when I met him, he was homicidal and suicidal, active duty Green Beret.
So back to where'd you go?
I'm still here.
Yeah, you popped out and then you popped back into the studio. And I got to apologize to my listeners. There's a lot of background noise on Eugene's end, but that's all right. We're going to power through it anyway.
Thank you.
So the relationship with SOF, though, like, how did they get to know you?
Right. So, an interesting set of circumstance. I was invited to give a grand rounds in Fort Bragg. I met Colonel Tulin, who is one of the commanders there, and he introduced me to a number of special forces people. I've always been interested in treating them. And then there was an organization who gave us some funds to treat a decent number of special forces. So
Fort Bragg, that was the Green Berets then?
Yes, sir. We start with Green Berets, and then that's what I learned. I should not say SF because that's Green Berets and Army. I should say SOF because we do not discriminate against SEALs or people like that. Or
are you aware of the link between Green Berets and the Canadian Special Forces?
Very much. So I have a funny story about Special Forces in Canada and me.
Okay.
So the other part interesting, how I met Devon, right? So we have a mutual acquaintance. So this mutual acquaintance was, or still is, active duty first-year operator in Canada. So I get this emails from my website. I'm Special Forces Canada. I'd like to talk to Dr. Lipov. So I go, oh, okay, great. Call me back. This is Eugene. I gave my cell number. He calls me and we start chatting for about 5 minutes. He goes, hold on. Is this Dr. Lipov or is this his secretary? I said, no, that's me. He said, I've never had anybody respond like that. Which is, I said, to me, SOF personnel are my brothers. So anything I can do, I'll jump out of my skin if I have to do to help. So we got along great. He said, and then he had a buddy, and it just shows, and that's part of the reason I love SOF culture. They'll do anything for their friends or brothers. So he had a active duty guy who was in deep trouble. He was drinking a lot of alcohol, like he was in deep hole. He called me up. He said, I'm going to bring him over. You're going to treat him, and we'll go from there. I said, okay, bring him over. We'll treat him. So the problem is they were both active duty. So they went to the command, and the command said, the guy who has alcohol problem can go, but you cannot go. So my contact, and the reason I'm not using his name is because, command is very sensitive about active duty.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which, better than I do. Anyway, so he drives him over, and he basically told the command, if you don't let me take my friend and he's going to die, I am going to go AWOL. So they go, fine, go. So we took him, then he drove straight from Toronto to us. We treated his friend. He did amazing. And then the SOF active duty man came back with his wife, and they did well. And he said, all right, I need to hook you up with Devon. And that's how we met.
Is that fellow that we're talking about still sober today? Like, did he quit drinking as a result?
Yes, sir. He's still doing great. And then this is through this active duty soldier. Can you have him? I'm on Zoom. Do you mind him stop hammering for a little bit, if that's possible? Thank you. Gracias. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Noise. Anyway, so this is how I learned that there is a connection between SF Canada and Fort Bragg. And in fact, I have a very close friend in Delta, active duty Delta. And then Delta apparently has a very close connection with Canadian SF. So,
Well, they're both tier one, and
right,
most people don't know the tiers, but Navy SEALs are tier two, except for SEAL Team 6, which is a tier one, and then Delta Force and JTF 2 are both tier one.
right.
They're just on a whole other level.
I am well aware of it, and I became very cognizant of that. I've had absolute honor taking care of. I probably took care of now 20 Delta Force personnel, and we probably take care of about 4 or 5 either retired active duty Canadian SOF. I think they're all of those go to tier one.
Let's slide back to secondary PTSD. I want to flesh that out a little bit for the audience, for people that aren't familiar with that. So I'll give you my take on it, and then let me know if you agree, disagree, or if you need to put a point on it. So from what I understand, there are two basic types of secondary PTSD. One is through epigenetics, where it just genetically gets passed on to you. And the other is, we call it the blast radius. So we're all a product of our environment. So if somebody comes home with PTSD, like my grandfather did after World War II, he absolutely passed it on to his two children, who passed it on to me. And so that was before I even joined the army. I was I childhood trauma as a result of that. And so it's just that because the injury affects your behavior and your perception in such a way that it affects others significantly. That's
You
why it destroys marriages and whatnot. Go
totally.
go ahead. Go
I'd
ahead,
like
Eugene.
I'd like to tweak it a little bit.
Please.
So epigenetics is totally different from secondary PTSD.
Yes.
Epigenetics describe it beautifully, by the way. So the way I read somewhere, which is a beautiful description, nature loads the gun, experience fires it.
Mm.
Meaning, if you have a very easy life and you're prone to develop PTSD, then if you're exposed to trauma, you will develop PTSD. If you are not prone to PTSD, exposed to trauma, you may not get PTSD as readily. So if you look at it in real world, if you have a combat unit, of let's say 8 people, 4 die, and out of the 4, 2 had bad childhood or bad epigenetics, and 2 had beautiful childhood, no epigenetic predilection, the guys who got bad epigenetics will develop PTSD at much higher rate.
The soft community in particular. I mean, the military across the board, military first responders, they typically have higher ACEs scores, which
Right.
is adverse childhood events, which is childhood trauma.
100%.
People with childhood trauma tend to go into first responder and military fields. But when you go up the food chain of difficulty in the forces, like infantry, which is what I was, across the board,
Hard
people
work.
have higher ACEs scores, end up joining the infantry. And then those that go beyond the infantry all the way to soft, their ACEs scores are higher again. So the higher the ACEs scores, or the higher the degree of training and the high speed, low drag unit that you're joining, chances are that everybody there has some pretty horrific childhood stories. It's, I mean, it's not everybody. There's people without childhood trauma that climb that ladder
Right.
too, but on the whole, the higher you go in the tiers, um, the more childhood trauma. Have you fleshed out why that is? Like, what is it about childhood trauma that has people seeking out these kinds of or you, I mean, I'm not talking scientifically, but philosophically.
No, I have a couple of answers to that. What's interesting is that, and I will give you what I mean. being kind of science oriented, I'll tell you what's known and what's just my guess, right?
Sure.
So I have a pretty high A score myself, so I'm well aware of it. If you don't mind, let me finish talking about PTSD,
Sure.
secondary PTSD, and then we'll get back into that, and I'll give you the direct answer. So secondary PTSD is when, let's say, you are married to a man and who has PTSD, who is violent, and you have to walk around in eggshells. You don't know what kind of mood they're going to come in. So you walk into the house, say hello, your head gets hit in the wall or gets slapped or something else happens. All of the unanticipated stress can cause PTSD. And that's what my father was like. He would go from 0 to 100 in like a picosecond over nothing. And then what's interesting, after I do the block, a lot of people go, I go 1 to 3. If I'm in battle, I can really do well because I'm really focused, but I don't go straight up. So that's why it helps so much in relationships. And what's cool about it, my dream is to treat the guys and their wives together. And we're starting to do that. And Devin and I are trying to join forces to do exactly that. Because you can look at PTSD as STD, which is infective agent, right? Because you can pass it back and forth, which is really scary. Anyway, based on A scores. So A scores actually predict a lot of things. A scores predict early mortality. Like people can die early. The higher the A score, the sooner people will die from heart attacks. And we can get at the epigenetic clocks and all that. But there's a whole big thing. So I'm into longevity. That's why I wear my Oura ring and I monitor myself and I check my DNA and all of that. But what's interesting is there is a whole concept called hormesis. Ever heard that term?
No.
So it was discovered that if you take a plant and you give it too much herbicide, everything dies, right? But if you give not as much herbicide, you just hit it a little bit, it becomes stronger. So it doesn't kill you, makes it stronger. It's biological reality. So what it does actually builds up different resistance, activates different genes, so it makes you a lot stronger. So let's take a Delta Force guy or Devin. He's gone through whatever he went through childhood. Then he goes to basics training, which is not that easy. Then you go to combat, and then you go to tier 1. So what I think what those guys are doing, and women, they're building up their resistance and resilience by doing more and more harder and harder things. It activates a very complex cascade of genetics change. Isn't that crazy?
So tell me about some of these changes. Like, what are some of the physiological changes that happen in somebody when they? And I know you'll agree that let's switch to PTSI, which is the same
Well,
thing, but
that,
that you and I have been saying that. I smiled from ear to ear when you did your interview with Devin and talking about how important it is to change the nomenclature because it matters. And I have said on the show, I don't even know how many times, but I don't call it PTSI because it makes me feel better. Because it's more accurate, and it is more accurate because it is a neurological injury and not. So it's not just in your head; it's a neurological injury.
well, you know, I can talk about PTSI forever, but well, if I may, let me give you the history of that.
Sure.
So the person who came up with the term was not me; it was Dr. Frank Ackberg, a very amazing friend of mine. He's the guy who came up with Stockholm syndrome when he was working with FBI. He used to be number 2 man for National Institute of Mental Health. And he believed that PTSD was a stigmatizing term that led to problems. General Shirelli, a 4-star general who was in charge of suicide prevention for U.S. Army, and Frank went to APA, American Psychiatric Association, and they said, please change the name. It's really important because our people are dying. And APA in 2012, in their wisdom, decided to say no. I really don't have a reason. I don't understand why, but regardless. So the reason the name, I believe, needs to be changed is threefold. Number one, I did a survey, which I published in 2023. Turns out, if you change the name, people will change the perspective, and the stigma will get better. There's many articles that show that the stigma leads to suicides, lack of care, because people don't think it's possible to get fixed.
Stigma kills.
Stigma kills,
Flat
right?
out. Stigma kills.
Yeah. So my rubric, actually, if you look at my PSA, which I'll share with you, it's 59 seconds. It equates a broken leg, an X-ray, and functional MRI and PTSI. Same thing. The point is, if it's real, you can see it. There's no stigma around broken leg. It's like, okay, fine. I jumped out of the plane. I broke my leg. That's all good. All right, let's fix it, right? There's no problem. So you can do a brain scan. It shows amygdala activation. Amygdala is where PTSD lives, or PTSI. Anyway, so I published that paper, and I gave a speech at the American Psychiatric Association actually this year saying we need to change. So what's interesting is that other people, like a 4-star general who sees these people dying, is asking for this to change, and it has not been changed yet, which I think is interesting, to put it politely. So to that, actually, I would love your listeners, if possible, to fill out. So I have this letter writing campaign. So if you go on my website, itsptsi.com, people can put in their name and either fill out a form letter or type their own. Just leave it to my site, and I'll send it to the APA, to the head of the DSM committee, or there is an address to send their own letter. So I also did a sciencey write-up why the name needs to be changed. So it's interesting. The name changes are fluid, right? Since the last edition of DSM-4 changed to DSM-5 in 2012, there are 4 names that have changed. One of them is learning disability. And the psychiatrists felt there was too much stigma around that. So they changed it to learning differences. Many more people have PTSI versus learning disabilities. And again, they're talking about stigma, right? So it's very clear to me why the name needs to be changed. The other thing is, in order to justify changing the name scientifically for APA, you need to be able to demonstrate that current name causes harm. To me, that's a no-brainer, because my study clearly shows it takes away stigma. It clearly causes harm. There's no debate. So right now is the time to do the campaign, because APA acknowledged they received my stuff, all the science stuff, September 6th. So they think it's going to take 2 months to respond. So the more attention, the more people say, hey, we want to change, the better. Anything you can do, that would be amazing.
Somebody's just asking the name of the website, so I'm just putting it in the comments here. PTSI.com. Is that right?
No, it's ITS PTSI.
ITS PTSI.
Yeah, it's PTSI. If you look at my website, my pin, so I'm really into this is my passion, right? So it's PTSI. So it's PTSI.com. It has letter writing campaign, explanation, what, why, how, and you can see the people who are wearing the pin. Also, if people want to support the cause, they can buy this pin. Beautiful, I might say.
Absolutely. Very, very fashionable.
Very fashionable. And then proceeds will go to our non-for-profit, aptly termed eraseptsdnow.org.
eraseptsdnow.org.
Yes.
So it's quite recently that you've taken the treatment yourself, isn't it?
Well, I did it in 2 phases. The first phase was 5 years ago, and the one that I recently had was 2 years ago. If you want to see a video of that, it's on my YouTube.
Yeah. I saw some of it. So you did both the left and the right?
I did right about 5 years ago, and the left was about 2 years ago. The reason I did mine, I thought I was doing great, strong, right? Strong like bull. I've been through my mother's death, and I saw her dead on the floor, which was crazy, horrible. I got hit by a propeller blade. I almost lost half my blood volume. I had a lot of other pretty interesting experiences, but I was doing okay, I thought. And then we adopted a child who really pushed me over, and he was something else. And then I was starting to get fugues. So fugue is when you basically walking around, you go, oh, you got stuck. And I was like, my wife would just go, you function at a very high level there. You're like a noodle at home. What is wrong with you? So I called up my very close friend, Steve Porges, who came up with polyvagal theory. I don't know if you've heard that term. He's a very
Heard it,
famous.
don't understand it.
I can tell you all about it. I spent a lot of time, him explained to me at his house, so I get it. But he said, you have fugues, go get fixed. And so I got treated. So after I got treated, it was funny because my kid was adopted and he was very manipulative. And he would push my wife and I around and he would make me feel bad. So I get my block done and I was back to my normal command fashion. I used to run trauma units. So usually I'm not a pushover as a trauma commander, right? Or, I was in charge of it as a resident. So I said, Sam, here's the deal. All the bullshit is over. Knock it off. And just the mere fact I was able to get changed stabilized his behavior because he knew there was very clear borders and he couldn't push me or my wife around. Before, she had to do all the heavy lifting. And I said, after I got treated, I said, Robin, I got this now. We got it. So he graduated from diesel mechanic school and he's gainfully employed and happy.
So let's talk about some of the symptoms and how it impacts life. I think that I've failed in 308 episodes at really putting a fine point on it. So I'll leave it to someone else. Like, why is the PTSI injury so destructive to a person's life and to families?
Well, if I may, let's talk about the symptoms first and we'll talk about everything else.
Sure.
Because I think about this every day. Because I'm always trying to maximize efficacy, right? That's my thing. So the symptoms of PTSI are the following: sleep disorder. If you look at the perspective of just think of running from the tiger, what's going to happen? You have paranoia because the tiger is going to eat you. It's like, what? It's going to eat me. So you have to run fast. You can't sleep very deeply because this tiger might kill you when you're sleeping. You're not going to have normal sexual function because you're not going to be reproducing with the right tigers around you. Turns out 85% of men with PTSI have sexual dysfunction. And I wrote a chapter on that, why that is. People who have PTSI, the chance of developing heart attacks is twice as likely as people without it. But so hypervigilance, also being very easily aroused and being very easily triggered. Easy trigger is another symptom. And think about it in the relationship, none of those are really particularly good things. So those are the symptoms. But what it does to the family, first of all, if you look at the divorce rate in SOF and military, it's skyrocketing. It's extremely high. And then the question is, why do people commit suicide? Because suicide rate of 22 per day has been kind of the rubric, people talking about it. A friend of mine has been looking at those numbers. I may be significantly higher than people really realize, which is scary. So considering my mother's death, I've looked at suicide in great detail. There are two things that predict suicide behavior. Number one, sleep dysfunction. If you can't sleep, you're not really thinking right. Turns out when you're sleeping, during the day when you're thinking, you're producing poisons. In order to get the poisons out of the brain, it drains out of your brain at sleep. So if you're not sleeping, you have poisons around the brain, literally, and you're not functioning well. And you're aging quicker from that. And impulsivity is the second thing. So if you have both of those, the chance of suicide behavior is much higher. So where DSR comes in, it works very well in sleep, and it also works very well in impulsivity. And that's where the guy's going, I'm going to 0 to 60 in a microsecond. Now it's like, I have time to think about it. Instead of punching out somebody in the bar and go, nah, you're an asshole, and just walks away. That's a very adaptive, great thing. I also wrote a paper about that DSR may actually change DNA significantly. So we're actually doing a study right now looking at aging. So there is something called epigenetic clock. So there is a way to predict who's going to die when by epigenetic shift in your DNA. What's interesting about that, though, is that it turns out if you can reduce or eliminate PTSI symptoms, you can reverse that change.
So PTSI shortens telomeres, and resolving it lengthens your telomeres?
And telomeres is kind of to me, a has-been concept. No, the cool kids in aging space guy is David Sinclair. He is co-chair of longevity in Harvard. He is a geneticist and knows a thing or two. So the problem with telomeres, sometimes they grow, sometimes they shorten. I think it was a great idea in the beginning. I don't think it's accurate. I think what's accurate, because the question is what's accurate. So what's accurate is you take a DNA, you do splice it, dice it, whatever you do to DNA, and you can say, based on this DNA, you're going to die with high certainty at this age or this many years. So telomeres don't do that. They're not really, they're like, maybe. However, epigenetic clock, so Dr. Harworth from UCLA came up with something called epigenetic clock. So his predicting ability is ridiculously accurate. So if people are interested in looking it up, look up GRIM, GRIM, age, AGE. You can read about, but basically
that is grim. And I wonder if it's a good thing or a bad thing to know how long you're going to live. I could see it being either, but it certainly helps somebody with carpe diem, seizing the day, living in the moment.
No, but you're making one little assumption, Mark. You're making an assumption that whatever you get, that's a report. It's like, hey, you're aging fast. It's like, okay, it's time to die, right? Put your things in order. No. It's not that kind of thing. It's changeable. So think of this. I have a genetics degree from 1980. Epigenetics was not even thought of. Nobody knew about that. So epigenetics, you can take. So most people think the only way DNA is have a mutation, like you have radiation change the mute. That's not like that. Epigenetics, you can turn the gene on, or you can turn it off with your behavior in your environment. So let's say you're a Delta guy, right? So let's say tier 1 Delta, and those guys go through battle. So let's say we test all of them, and let's say 20% show you're aging very fast. Okay, that's fine. So what do we do then? We do DSR, we do ketamine, we do SOF method, we do psychotherapy, we do supplementation vitamins, and they change the lifestyle. You can actually see the reversal, so you'll live longer. So passive information. So if you know about it, that's just upsetting. I mean, why know when you're going to die? That's just upsetting. But if you have something to do with, think about it. If somebody checks your cholesterol and it's really high, well, okay, carpe diem. Do something with cholesterol. Stop it and take some statins. I mean, really? No.
Eat an apple, maybe.
Eat an apple. Yeah, maybe walk a little bit. That's a new concept. But you see my point, though? It's not biology is not destiny. I mean, whoever said it was a genius. Biology is not destiny. You can measure the biology, but it's a warning sign. If your sugar is 500, get some insulin.
Well, let's expand on some of the things that people probably wouldn't guess as far as symptoms or signs and symptoms of PTSD. Higher rates of cancer is one.
Yes. You would like to know why that is?
Please do. Well, I think I understand, but I'd like to hear what an actual expert has to say.
Well, I don't have a huge studies behind, but I do know one thing. So stellate ganglion block definitely changes immune system. It can make it work normal. It's been used in China to treat ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disease. So there is a direct connection from the stellate ganglion, which is where the sympathetic fight or flight nerves live, to the thymus, which controls T cells, and a bone marrow, which controls B cells. That's the immune system right there. So everybody develops cancer. People may not know that, but everybody develops cancer cells. But very few people get cancer because the immune system is a scavenger. It's going to eat all the cancer cells, so they never get stuck, so never develop cancer. So if your immune system is suppressed, your scavenging is down, so now the cancer cells have a place to go. Not interesting?
Yeah. So I guess I was online.
Oh, you're 100% right. 100%.
That's perfect. And the reason that the immune system is suppressed from PTSI is because the cortisol that's constantly pumping. And the cortisol, no. Okay.
No. It's
Correct me, please.
Yeah. So everybody is all excited and revved up about cortisol. Woo! Adrenal gland fatigue. Woo! Yes. But that's a secondary effect. The primary effect, think about it. If you're running from the tiger, your cortisol, by the time it kicks in, the tiger ate you already, you're done. It's a slow system. It's called HPS system. The first thing that happens is norepinephrine goes up. Like somebody comes at you with a knife, your norepinephrine goes bang. 1-2 minutes. And you start running or hitting or doing whatever, fight and flight. As you're running, your body tells, actually, nucleus ceruleus, which controls the sympathetic system, tells the HPS system, hey, kick out adrenaline, kick out prednisone, kick out all the stuff. That's down the road. So yes, it happens. But what I was telling you before is fight and flight system itself suppresses the immune system. Not cortisol. That's a separate system. Different. It's an adrenals.
Epinephrine does it.
Norepinephrine. No, epinephrine is the brother of norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is a transmitter in the brain of sympathetics.
Okay. But either way, always being switched on, the hypervigilance, that will reduce your immune system. Suppress it.
And because if you think about what PTSI is, fight and flight system is normal. We need that. If somebody comes at me right now, I need to be able to deal with that, right? But the problem is when you have either too much stimuli or over time you're too sensitive, it gets stuck. If your sympathetic system is stuck on position, all the bad things we described happen.
I remember, especially when I was fresh out of the Army, I would get cold sores all the time. And depending on what was going on, they would be more prevalent than other times. And like any kind of travel or anything else that would be stress inducing, there's the cold sore. And with that, that's just a very blatant, your immune system is taking a beating. And the hypervigilance back then was brutal, like brutal, the hypervigilance.
Your immune system should be here, activation. No, let's say it wasn't working here. With your PTSI, it was here. But now, when you had stress or whatever, then it goes even lower. So now your chance of developing cold sores is because the immune system doesn't suppress herpetic virus, right? And so on. That's exactly right. You gave a perfect explanation.
Well, it's one of the challenges with PTSI is self and situational awareness is the shits. So what I mean by that is to have true situational awareness, you first need self-awareness. Self-awareness is key, but it has been my experience, certainly with my life, and I've observed it within our community a lot, that when you have PTSI, you think everybody else is the problem. Everybody else is the a-hole. And you don't realize that they're just reacting to you. You don't realize that it's your energy, that it's your demeanor that's creating the situation that you don't like. And that's why I went undiagnosed for 23 years. So that's a long time. But unfortunately, that's the norm because you think everybody else has the problem. You don't realize that it's yourself that has the problem. So a PTSI really limits somebody's self-awareness, which is why the first step of realizing, oh shit, that's me. I'm the problem. All the stuff that's happening that I don't like, I caused it. Oh no, this isn't good. But if you understand that it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're a jerk. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because you have an injury that constantly has you throwing into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And and let's talk about the amygdala a little bit.
Sure.
So it's my understanding, and that it's usually spoken about in the wrong way. So here's my understanding, that the amygdala is more of a switching station than anything else. And the information comes in, and your amygdala decides, am I going to send that to the cerebellum for fight, flight, freeze, so the lizard brain? Or am I going to send it to the frontal cortex, where you can have rational, calm thought and really think about it? And then what happens well, it doesn't have to be combat, but in combat, in particular, in a war zone, the amygdala just keeps throwing it to the cerebellum, so to the lizard brain. So it's the lizard brain that's doing all of the thinking or reacting for you. And when that is just too much, those neural pathways become the dominant pathways. So information comes in, and instead of getting thrown to the frontal cortex, where you can sit and have a rational thought about it and think about it, when emotion is high, rationale is low. That's a soft saying, but it's true. When emotion is high, rationale is low. So then all of a sudden, that's why everything is a threat, because the amygdala keeps throwing everything to the cerebellum. Please fix that big
Yeah.
mess I just gave you.
As much as I like to say amazing explanation, I would say, nah, I don't think so.
Okay.
So,
Do it your way.
so let's try. So there are three brains people talk about: fish brain, medulla oblongata. It makes you breathe. That's very basic core functions. Limbic system. You're absolutely right. Limbic system is reptilian brain. The two pieces of limbic system very interesting to me is amygdala is actually a limbic system. Neocortex sits on top of that. So the way I describe it is limbic system isn't happy, nobody's happy. So let's look and compare a human being to a antelope. So if the antelope hears a click in a forest, it starts running. Doesn't know why, doesn't know how. So you have an ear, which takes the sound waves, sends the amygdala. Amygdala goes, red alert, what? Crazy, crazy, time to run. About a mile out, it slows down and starts to look around. It's like, is there any threat? The point about amygdala, you have no control of that. So let me give you an example of my favorite story where I was on a podcast and they said, it's like, okay, that's all very interesting, but how about the upper mind? Higher consciousness. I said, I don't know from that. I'm not an expert in that. I don't understand it. But I'll tell you one thing. I was the first one in the globe to treat Stellate ganglion, using Stellate ganglion to treat a dog with PTSI. That poor guy got caught on the truck and got burned. And he had symptoms of hypervigilance, sleep, and he was nasty. Before that, he was very nice. So we treated him, he did well. The point I'm making, there's no difference between a human being and a dog or other mammal as far as our amygdala. So the way you can induce, or the way you do a scan is you show somebody with PTSI a nasty picture or emotionally charged picture, amygdala lights up. So if you look at the people who have PTSI, it's not the pathways that changed. What's changed is the amygdala itself is overactive. So it's a controller outside your mental control. Now, the way ketamine works is really cool. It activates or improves the pathway between the prefrontal cortex, where you have volitional control, and the amygdala. That's part of the reason ketamine works. Isn't that cool?
It is cool. Now, ketamine, the clinics are popping up all over the place, all over Canada, and I'm very happy about that. Um, what is it about ketamine that, other than it's legal and you can have access to it because it's an anesthetic, but ketamine versus, say, psilocybin, or ketamine versus LSD?
So, well, they're all hallucinogenic drugs in a certain certain way. They all have different approaches. They kind of recruit different systems. I think psilocybin has a lot of promise, and LSD as well. It's been demonstrated to really reduce um, depression and alcohol use. I'm not familiar with LSD literature as much. The problem with all of those drugs, you can take it to a next level, right? On the street, ketamine is called vitamin K. I don't know what the name of psilocybin is, but those are particularly addictive. And there's a lot of the whole thing about our societal pressure on addiction, lack of addiction, all of that.
Psilocybin isn't addictive.
Well, so I mean, it's like the point is, there is society. I agree with that. By the way, there's no withdrawal in a sense, but
Yeah.
if you want to live in the dreamland all day long, that's probably not a great thing either, right? It's not physiologically addictive, but they call it psychologically addictive. You know what I mean? But I actually, in fact, I did psilocybin experience. It was a very lovely experience. Didn't do any psychiatric change for me, but I mean, it didn't do anything bad, which is great. So it's a safe drug, but you understand my point, I think. So ketamine.
The psilocybin literature has been really interesting, and it's only over the last year or 18 months that microdosing has gone beyond the anecdotal into the peer-reviewed literature.
100%.
So without any psychoactive, like no hallucinations, no pink elephants, no psychoactive bit at all, just the microdosing by itself definitely gives a lift. And I've experienced it, and it's lovely. But the literature now supports that.
Oh, no question. I think big institutions now are studying it. I think like UCLA does a lot of studies in that space, and so does Hopkins. Absolutely.
It's interesting to me. There's I forget the name of the outfit now, but they make artificial psilocybin. And the reason is that within the medical community, everybody's always very concerned about dosage. Well, what if there's too much? What if there's too little? How do we make this so that it's repeatable?
Right.
Whereas it's psilocybin. It doesn't matter. Like you can't OD on it. It's not going to kill you. Might freak you out if you have too much, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to kill you. And I know because I once did a 14 gram super ride.
Oh, wait,
that was too much.
You have to throttle back for a second. That sounds too much.
It was way too much.
By the way, there are new psilocybins coming out, psilocybin derivatives, which will not be high, but they will be at day, I think, within 5 years, where psilocybin derivative will be available, very clean and controllable thing. But keep in mind that some people have very bad trips on psilocybin. Like I was involved with this group of 20 people. 1/3 had really bad trips that scared them to no end. So it's not benign in that sense.
But everybody I've talked to, that you give them a few weeks after that so-called bad trip, and they're still glad that they did it, because those bad trips are nothing more than, I mean, I don't want to say across the board, but from the conversations that I've had, that the bad trips are simply, they were hanging on. They were trying to control. They couldn't let go and just let the experience be. And but even the bad trips, once the effects settled down, there was still the benefit there. There was still, oh, depression's gone for the next couple months, or in some cases permanent. It's just gone. For myself, I find that about every 3-4 months, I got to do a macro dose, and then I'm all right. But my wife knows when it's time. She's like, honey, when's the last time you did mushrooms? Oh, it was about 4 months ago. Yeah, probably time to rethink that. Maybe have another go.
And again, I will preface it that I'm not an expert in psilocybin. I know something about it. I know quite a bit about ketamine and DSR, but the only thing I would like your listeners to realize that you can get in trouble on psilocybin. You need to be somebody around you. Don't do it by yourself. Be
Yes.
safe. Don't go crazy doses. So, Mark,
Yeah, don't
telling
do 14 grams. That's too much.
please don't do it. No. And in fact, if you look at the UCLA studies, here's what basically the best way to do psilocybin. And I studied in the lab, very clean, very specific. It needs to be controlled dose. You can always go higher, right? But but you took it, you're committed. It needs to be in a quiet room, and you need to be somebody around to help you if you need help. Because if you start to have a bad trip, whatever, it could be very scary. Like there's one lady that was in our cohort. She's very religious, and she had a very bad experience. She still to this day talks about it. So
Mm-hmm.
be careful. Get professionals to do it, please. So, Mark, with all due respect to you about psilocybin, just easy goes, right? Don't overdo.
Easy goes.
That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking.
No, I've changed my. I had to try it once though. So tried it once, but I'm right around 3 or 4 grams is kind of just about right for me. It's enough that like it's not a wild ride. I wish I could have the experiences that I keep hearing about. I don't get to meet God or anything like that. I just get to see cool colors. So 3 or 4 grams is about right for me, but I think everybody's a little bit different.
How about if I tell you my experiences in psilocybin?
Please.
I think there are two things that happened, which is really interesting. So one is when I took the psilocybin, I went about 6 hours. I was flying in this beautiful gold mesh in a cool looking spaceship. It was really fascinating. And not necessarily, I didn't want to do it again, but it was, it was interesting. But then, so we had microdosing. So before, when I was telling I was hit by a propeller blade, I had an out of body experience then. So without psilocybin, I was just pure trauma. So it's interesting. Sitting by this beautiful creek with my wife, and we had microdosing, and I got back to the tunnel where I was like 40 years before, and my mother was there and saying, "I'm doing great, everything is fine." It was very peaceful and very healing for me.
So you had an NDE, you had a near death experience.
Oh yes, sir. I was in a tunnel. It was quite interesting.
My personal belief on that is that it's not a hallucination at all. I believe that our consciousness lives for a short time in this mortal coil, walking around in our bodies in this meat bag, and then we just continue on the other side. I also believe that the psychedelics expand your consciousness, and that they just make you aware of other perspectives, because some of the experiences I've had on psilocybin, there's no way my brain could possibly conjure up the imagery, the complexity. I'm just not that smart. There's no way my brain could imagine some of the things that I've witnessed. I don't think my brain could do that.
I'm not debating that, and equally, again, I'm not a philosopher in that space. But I will tell you, I've seen stuff, and that stuff happened to me that actually reinforced my belief that God exists. And some of the stuff, and I was able to survive. And just the mere fact that you and I meeting and talking about this, I have been hopefully a compassionate individual in my life, especially trying to help my mother, leave something good out of the horrible. Just to be able to do all of this, I live. My wife would tell you if she would ask her, that you live in a state of awe all the time, awe, like. And just, I think a lot of it is like my son goes, "Come on, you're a scientist. How can you believe in God?" And I said, I don't think two are mutually exclusive at all. Just my opinion.
Agree completely. I agree completely. I mean, how can anybody listen to the theory and consider the theory that God is actually an AI and all this is a artificial experience, that it's all a hologram that we're living in, and not see the parallel between that and creation? It's the same thing from a different perspective. It's the same.
That's philosophy. I got an F in philosophy, so I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, but it's spelled with a PH.
Probably got a little too much Matrix on their mind. They watched it too many times.
Yeah, it could be. Could be. What's the future of the treatment that you do, combining SGB, stellate ganglion block, with ketamine, and how has it been received by the stakeholders? So, like from first responder world, from the military and veteran world, how's it being received? And are you optimistic that it's going to start to be the rule instead of the exception?
Well, let's start backwards. I'm hyper optimism. So to believe that you can actually change psychiatry, that takes a lot of optimistic view right there. It takes a
Yeah,
lot. Yeah, that's
that's
like,
right.
especially not being a psychiatrist, right? It's like, how
Hmm.
do I belong here? So the reason I have persisted is because I've seen amazing results, and people say you saved our lives. Marriage was saved. You feel so much better, and that's why I've been persistent. I think as the time goes by, we have more and more support. There is a lot of stakeholders, as you would say, like, for example, the gentleman we referred to from first tier operators from Canada has been talking to command. There seems to be some interest in that. I'm trying to do the same as Fort Bragg and places like that, Fort Campbell. Has it switched? No. And I can tell you why and what we're doing to fix that. But ultimately, especially in special force, what I love the terminology in special force I learned from Devon. Words not deeds. I forgot what it is in Latin. I mean, deeds not words.
Yeah.
So show me the money. Does it work? And does it make a difference? There is a right. And then, so I think it will be acceptable in about 2 years. It'll probably become standard of treatment. I hope.
Oh, well, let's hope. It is fascinating to me, the resistance to modalities. I mean, in Canada, I'm probably expert status. I have to be, because of the show, on different modalities, what works, what doesn't work. And between, like, the treatment that you do makes perfect sense to me from what I understand about SGB and ketamine. But nobody's coming to me to say, "Hey, what's your short list?" So, like, where's the interest?
What
There's no other show like the one that I have, that goes into all these different modalities, and yet there just doesn't seem to be an interest in the solutions. 22-0 is a form of neurolinguistic programming that has very high efficacy and has just done wonderful, wonderful things all over the world. And they're out of the States, but it's a tough road to hoe. The resistance to change, the resistance to solutions is mind-boggling to me.
Let me give you an interesting caveat. I think you'll understand what everything is at. So, medical system by its nature is very conservative, and you know how doctors wash hands right before surgery, right?
Yep.
You're scrub in. I did 2 years of surgery, so you scrub in, so there's no bugs in your hands.
Mhm.
Have you heard the story how that came about?
It's been a while since I've heard this story.
Let me tell you the story. And the reason I bring up the story is because when people ask me how we able to survive all this naysayers and pushbacks and lack of resources, all of that, and I say, hey, it's really simple. It's all about the hand washing. They go, what? What are you talking about? Anyway, so there was a gentleman that was born in Hungary. He went to medical school in Austria, which was like the premier medical school in the day, which is about 1864, I believe. So he gets to Austria and he looks around, and turns out when women delivered children at home, the chance of death was 1/3 compared to when they delivered in a hospital. And he looked around, and he turns out in that day and age, the doctors would dissect the bodies and walk over and deliver the children, like at the same time, pretty much. And he said, "You're carrying something with you. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Wash your hands." And he published on it. He published a book. And basically, the doctor said, "You're accusing us of being dirty. That's horrible." They freaked this guy out. They put him in a psych ward, and he was beaten to death within a month of admission. 20 years later, he was pronounced the savior of babies. Sperm theory came by. So my point is, I'm still alive. They haven't put me in a psych ward yet. Hopefully, I'll be able to stay out of that. And then we actually have a whole plan. And the most important thing to understand in medicine, if you don't understand why it works, the docs will be not interested in that, including me. I mean, that's how I was trained. But to that, we had an amazing donor who gave us appropriate funds to do like a big ass study with NYU to do brain scans, functional MRIs, and the injection. And her name is Linda Vester and her husband, Glenn Greenberg. Amazing people. I think that study will be out next year, I hope. I think that could change everything, because that would actually say there is a brain change. We can reverse the brain change, and look how people have done. That's what it
It's just incredible to me that PTSIs are just done off the DSM. Like, you can do a brain scan and you can see the injury. There it is. And yet it is diagnosed. And because of that, it's misdiagnosed so often because ADD, PTSI, TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, when you look at the list of symptoms side by each, they're almost identical. So there's all kinds of misdiagnosis as a result, and because of the misdiagnosis, there's mistreatment. But all you got to do is the brain scan, and then you're not guessing, you're not throwing darts at the target. You know what is going on, and then you can give the appropriate treatment. Do you think that we're ever going to get there where before there's a solid diagnosis that they actually start doing some more brain scans?
Oh, 100%. So, well, brain scans are not as simple, unfortunately, it could be simple, but it's a little more complex. But let me give you an example. So you talk about ADD. So most of the people, I think, in Delta Force are diagnosed as ADD, and they give them meds for that. So after I did the DSR and ketamine, so SOF method, on a couple of guys, they no longer fit the diagnosis of ADD, so they stopped their meds. So if you look at DSM, the first DSM came out in 1952, DSM-1. Homosexuality was considered disease then. It was not well accepted by the public, and DSM-2 quickly changed that. So the point is, it just, they did the best they could with what they had. But now this was 1952. You're looking 70 years later with all the diagnostic stuff. So let me put on my scope and look forward in the future, 5 years from now. In fact, I am meeting with a company next week to talk about a bioassessment scan using a headset and a cell phone. So functional MRIs is another one. The other part is like in pain medicine, where originally I came from. Somebody comes in, they have something called CRPS, burning of the hand. You do Stella ganglion block, and the symptom goes away. You don't really need a scan. You can make a diagnosis by doing a procedure that's isolated, that's specific. If you take psychiatric drugs, you really don't know what it's doing. When it's specific to sympathetic nerves, you can actually isolate it. So I think in 5 years, people will do genetic scanning all the time. There are certain proteins in the body that demonstrates PTSI, but peeling away ADD, TBI, all of that. So if you look at a lot of times, you go see a psychiatrist, you walk away with a diagnosis, about 7 or 10 diagnoses. It has PTSI, it has features of severe depression, feature of anxiety, feature of this, feature of that. How do you treat features? I don't know what that means. So there will be a scan to be able to peel it away. Probably multiple scans, and I think it'll be a fusion of DNA, epigenetics, machine learning will be used to predict it. There will be certain tests, physiologic tests, and brain scans. All of that together.
Are you teaching other clinicians how to treat the way that you treat, or are you trying to open up more clinics so that there's more accessibility to this particular treatment that you do?
So I am CMO, Chief Medical Officer for Stella Center. So I may talk about intervention from up high. So somehow or other, I was connected to a very wealthy individual in Chicago, and he loved the idea of helping people. So we set up something called Stella Center. So we have 40 sites in the United States. We have one in Israel, and we have 4 in Australia. So we're actually a multinational company. So everybody gets to follow my protocol. And part of my job is to make sure they have all the equipment and all the drugs I need to keep it safe. Like interlipids, for example, is an amazing drug. If there is a problem, you can deal with things. And now we actually we're getting more sophisticated every day. We have an amazing cadre of nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners, who do the assessment, and they can peel away what kind of problems they have. So yes, absolutely. We're training people, and we're about to hopefully do a study with another major institution to demonstrate efficacy on a large scale. So yes, the idea is we would like to have Stella everywhere where people are trained correctly, because there is a lot of variety of capabilities. This is a procedure. The thing about Stella Ganglion, if I may, let me tell you through what it's like to do the procedure, and I can kind of see how it all works into it. So basically, somebody gets an IV in. That's for safety. About 2/3 of the people I do go to sleep. Like when I was done, I went to sleep. I wasn't going to tell my guy where to put the needle. And then the procedure, we use ultrasound to find what the blood vessels and everything is. We put local anesthetic in the right spot, move to another spot, and we're done. About 5 minutes procedure. But you need to be technically good at it. If you don't know what you're doing, you can have problems, right? And some people do it the wrong way. The other thing is, for your audience, do not ever, 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 ever let anybody do stellate on both sides the same day. That's absolute stupidity. Some people do that.
So, what should be the at least 1 day or 2 days apart?
One day, just
One
24
day
hours.
apart.
Yeah, exactly. It's a safety thing that people violating at their own risk. But if something bad happens, it's going to come back to hit the whole system of trying to treat people.
It can restrict your breathing, right?
Yeah, what happens is in about 7 to 8% of people, something called recurrent laryngeal nerve gets anesthetized. So there are 2 vocal cords, right? So when you anesthetize one side, vocal cord goes in the middle. If you hit the other side at the same time, it goes like this. You can't do that, then you can't breathe. The only way to then fix the problem is you have to put a tube in the throat here below the vocal cords. I would not suggest doing that. I've done it as a trauma surgeon. I would not do that. That's a bad thing.
And it sounds like a bad thing.
It is a bad thing. Very
uh,
often.
So, with the Stella Institute, is it coming into Canada anytime soon?
We're trying to. The medical system is complicated. We've been trying to navigate it. So one thing I've learned about SOF guys, once they set a path, they're like bulldogs. And to me, the reason I love SOF is where they go, the army goes, where army goes, society goes. So I think we're making some progress command in Canada. I hope. Again, I'm outside that loop. I think you can find out more what it is from Devon, and he can tell you everybody who is in active duty still for his buddies. But I think if it gets accepted there, we'd love to open multiple clinics in Canada. I personally treated about 200 people from Canada so far.
Well, I might be able to help you with that. My sponsor is Pure Life Healthcare Management, and they are growing rapidly and doing acquisitions, but they're a wraparound healthcare provider for PTSD. So
Okay.
they're very well might be a union there.
Please introduce me. I mean, so one thing about the people who run Stella are very smart about money and investments and all that. So if you can connect them, I bet you they can figure it out. I would love that. I've looked at it before. Regulatory systems in Canada were something else altogether. From what I understood, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I just know how to stick needles. That's all I know.
Well, it works. Um, for the audience, I wanted to throw in there just to really understand the impact of PTSI. I mean, it not only destroys marriages and relationships and leads to suicide, but it's also why there's homeless veterans. They're homeless because the symptoms preclude them from working. They can't work because you can't keep a job. You can't keep a job if you keep telling your boss to F off every time you feel challenged by your boss. So the chaos within manifests with the chaos without. When there's chaos inside you, that's what your life tends to look like. That chaos, that internal chaos manifests externally, and you can't have a stable job quite often. Sometimes some people can do it. There's high functioning people that can do it, but for those that can't, that's where addiction and homelessness comes from within the veteran first responder community. And that is also why there's so many Army veterans in particular who end up being truck drivers. They're so that they just go on the road and they stay away from people. Just keep me away from people. We see this all the time. So I just wanted to throw that in there to paint the picture for people that don't understand the injury.
Well, let me give you. I have very strong feelings about that. You probably, since you only met me, but I have strong feelings about a lot of things I care about. So let me give you an example. And if people are interested in that, you can go on my YouTube and see the commentary of this lady. So I've been on, it's called The Doctor's Show. It was a show out of LA.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on that show about 15 times, various treatments of people. I think the one that's relevant here, so there is this lovely African-American lady that was in Air Force, and she had MST, which is military sexual trauma, which is another story altogether. Anyway, so she was living in the street with 2 children. So somehow she got connected to the show. I treated her. She literally lived in the street. So we treated her. She did great. There was a follow-up show 3 years later. She got a PhD, I think, in management. And she got an apartment, she got a job, everything. So the question is, and so I've looked into homelessness from the lens of PTSI. So if you look at, in order to be employed, you need a couple of things. One, you need to be dependable. You need to show up for work. Telling people to F off is probably not a good thing. Yeah, temper, I would not recommend that. But the other part is what people don't think about, absenteeism, right? What causes absenteeism? If you smoke a lot, you get sick a lot. Just a fact. Also, if you drink a lot, yeah, if you wake up 3 days later, that's probably not the best employee that you can get. And if you think about why is alcohol such a problem, why do people do that? Because conventional thinking is addiction is a disease, and this yada yada yada. To me, it's like no. It's just a symptom.
Exactly.
You are so revved up. You're trying to get peace for 1 second, and you feel good for 1 second, and that's a huge deal. Unless you've been there, you don't know what it's like. So like I was telling originally in the beginning of our discussion, we talked about the gentleman who was a first-year operator. He was drinking a lot, like a lot. And he stopped like that. Why? Because his internal engine was going 5,000 miles per hour. So,
Well, you don't need the medicine if you don't have the injury. And alcohol is being used as a medicine because it's so somehow pretty much the worst drug that's out there, is most destructive drug is alcohol, and yet we cheer each other. Oh, let's have a drink. Let's all drink to that.
yeah.
Especially in military culture, it's just ridiculous, and yet it just destroys people.
Oh, not only destroys people, destroys livers, right?
Oh yeah.
I've had the pleasure taking care of people who die from cirrhosis. It is a very ugly go. It is very ugly. People bleed to death. Like we did hemorrhoid surgery on a guy with cirrhosis. He bled to death because we couldn't stop the bleeding.
Oh
It's
man.
much worse than you think.
My father passed away in March and smoked for 67 years. And I tell you, that's not the way he wanted to go, but that's how he went anyway. And we made him as comfortable as possible. But gasping for breath until your last breath is just a horrible, horrible way to go, but people do it anyway.
Because they can't help it. Honestly, they cannot help it. They cannot. My father smoked for years and years and years also. And he was a chest surgeon. He used to take out lungs, people with cancer. He knew better, but he couldn't help it.
Yeah. But again, you take away the trauma and then you take away the need to medicate it. And for a lot of people, that constant dopamine hit from taking a pull on a cigarette, that's their coping mechanism.
Oh, exactly. And it's like I always say, alcohol, you're just taking your troubles for a swim, but they're going to come back up.
Have you noticed then that smokers that you treat also quit smoking?
Quite a few. In fact, there is a reason, there's a physiological reason for that. The part of the brain that controls all addiction, sexual addiction, drinking, whatever, any kind of addiction is called the insula. So people who had insular infarct forgot to stop smoking like that. They forgot to smoke because the insula is what gets you addicted or keeps you addicted. So
Sexual addiction, I want to ask you about that. So
sure.
I've definitely suffered from that, and it's incredibly destructive. And yet it's not in the DSM, which is why I'm not a fan of the DSM. I think it's it's a book full of things that where people just they want to get their notoriety, so they come up with a disorder and ends up in the DSM, and then they get to high five their colleagues. So the DSM pisses me off. But
I'm not going to comment on that. You know my position.
but the point is that sexual addiction is not in the DSM. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to figure out a polite way of saying it. My point is, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It makes. I mean, so who needs to tell you? Do you need a psychiatrist to tell you that you have a problem? You probably know you have a problem. Does DSM create reality? Hell no. It's something we need to work with or within.
No, but it does. But it does affect the therapists. I'm not going to throw her under the bus, but the one that was given to me through the military clinics, when I wanted to talk about sexual addiction, she just rolled her eyes. That's not in the DSM, therefore it's not real. And that was the response.
What's interesting, if you do a brain scan, back to the brain scan, if you look at a cocaine addict, I saw this amazing video of the guy. He walks in, he has a cocaine addict on the table. And he says, I have cocaine in my hand right here. His insular cortex lights up, right? And if somebody has an orgasm, insular cortex lights up. Isn't that interesting?
Same thing.
Part of the brain, which part was unclear, it doesn't matter. So general definition, let me tell you the definition of addiction. It's kind of interesting. Addiction is defined as the following. When you continue the behavior when you know it's harmful for you. That's it. That's the definition. Doesn't matter what you do.
The way I say it is simple. Just two parts. Is it compulsive and is it destructive?
Exactly. And then, so if
the
you're
end.
hitting yourself in the head, that's an addiction. If you are, so the addiction to pornography and SOF is huge. When it stems from the, and I understand why that is, but it's disruptive. I mean, talk about trying to affect your family in the wrong way. That'll do it.
Yeah. Well, porn is interesting. I had a guest on who did a documentary called Confronting Porn. And was it Jeffrey Dahmer? No, Ted Bundy. I don't know. One of the serial killers, but he was like the day before his execution, he's like, it was porn. Like that's where it started. And then the studies start coming out that the neural pathways that watching too much porn creates creates brain damage. Porn consumption on a large scale creates a form of brain damage. So it's not harmless.
Well, let me tell you a couple other things. Think of how many children are exposed to porn now. You can't get away from it. But the other part that's interesting is that the number of people who are asexual now in the globe is ever been. They have no interest in sex. Because if you get you get everything you want on porn, all the equipment you're interested in, whatever actions you want to see. Why bother with a real person, opposite sex, or whatever sex it is? Because they'll never be able to live up to. You can't select, I want this person to do this and only do this on this time and this time. They have their own needs, shockingly. Porn seems to be one-sided.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things it's really underestimated just how damaging it can be to a person's life and to your family.
Well, because it's we're still a Puritan culture in a certain way, especially in the United States. That sex is never, it doesn't happen. Babies just come from starts. I mean, there's no sex involved. Okay, and for years there was debate. The women have orgasms. Does it matter? It's like, it's interesting. So I'm into weird medical things. So there was a female urologist that dissected. So the women have clitoris, which is top. That's what a lot of times leads to orgasm, stimulation of clitoris. And they dissected it back to the vagina. So the erectile tissue there is about 1/3 the size of a male penis. So there's a lot of erectile tissue there. That interesting?
It is. Side. Not where I thought the conversation would go, but that's all right.
I'll go with you wherever you got to go. It's learned something new, right?
Pardon?
You learn something new.
Something new every day. There you go. But I think we're about there. Is there at the beginning of the conversation you talked about misinformation when it comes to PTSI? What are some of the we'll close out with what are some of the top 3 myths that pick at you, that get under your skin about PTSI?
Well, number one, that it's a weakness of the soul or something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
That you can snap out of it. That's a part that really annoys me. That you can just get out of it and just move on. Why are you behaving like this?
Just let it go.
Yeah, just let it go.
Just let it go.
Why are you jumping up and down? Why? Why do you have to be such an asshole? Something gets in your face. Just let it go. Can't you be? Or my favorite one. Can't you be like everybody else? Okay, great.
It's like if you have a broken leg, just walk it off.
Yeah, rub some. Oh, my favorite. That's what SF guys talk about. Rub some dirt in it, just walk it off. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, rub some dirt on it.
But you put the dirt inside the brain, it's probably not good. Let me just tell you. Do not try that at home.
Oh. Well, you just have a Cepacol or you put on some foot powder. You're good.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah. So I do have a couple of plugs I'd like to put in if that's possible.
Please.
So my non-for-profit, where I started it in 2009. I'm a consultant for this company. It's called eraseptsdnow.org. So the more people can give us funds, the more we can treat. And we can do research through that entirety. So if people can think about donating as much or as little, also if you want to do sector donation, such as, hey, I just want to help SOF Canada, we would honor that. I think that would be amazing. We are actually, Devin and I are thinking about trying to bring all the family members and, of course, the first-year operators from the unit to Chicago, and I can treat as many of them as possible. We're trying to raise funds for that. I think it'd be amazing. Also, if you want to read more about kind of where all these crazy ideas I came up with and kind of my crazy life, there's a book out there. It's called Invisible Machine. It's on audio. It's available on audio and Amazon.
And what's the name of your podcast?
It's called Brain, Hope, Reality.
Brain, Hope, Reality.
Right. The first episode will be with Devon, and it should be out in about a week.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that one, and I hope that does well for you. I think the clip that he put on his channel is probably going to give you, because he's got like over 700,000 subscribers, so he's a pretty popular guy.
I know. I got to tell you, he's so bright, and the way he speaks is just fascinating to me. He's an amazing man.
He's a neat dude. And Dr. Lipov, Eugene, thank you.
Thank you.
This is fantastic, and it fills me full of hope because
Let's
there's
think.
I one of the reasons this show started was I thought there's got to be a better way, because what I went through talk therapy at the OSI clinic, the operational stress injury clinic, was brutal. It was just a meat grinder, and actually caused as much harm as it did good, maybe
Wow.
more. Like it was emotionally devastating going through those treatments. It was so hard. And I did it for years. And I thought there's got to be a better way.
You're absolutely right. So the other thing I'd like to leave with your listeners: do not, under any circumstance, do exposure therapy. That is a crazy ass idea that's not based on any science that I'm aware of.
Well, I did a buttload of it,
Oh,
and it did a lot of harm.
oh God.
Well,
And
I'll give you an example of it.
oh God, brutal.
One of the things in my service that I was trying to get out of my head was when I hit a tripwire. I'm the only guy I know that hit a tripwire without exploding. And
Like,
it's like a microsecond of time, right? And of course I remember the entire thing and leading up. Oh, you're gone. Hopefully he comes back to me here. Come on, Eugene, come back to me. Okay, now you're back.
can you
I
hear me?
just
I'm
want to
sorry,
tell
buddy.
my story and you ran away on me. So
No, something called. I'm sorry, it's a phone.
oh, it's okay. It's okay. But
Tripwire
basically
didn't
I was,
explode.
what's that, Eugene?
I said tripwire did not explode. That's where you left off.
Tripwire didn't explode. I was ground guiding the carriers who were doing a movement for a patrol, and so I was out in front. So um, anyway, I was by myself with the carriers behind me, and I hit a tripwire. Went across my shin. I came to a stop as fast as I could, backed off the tripwire, and didn't go boom. It was very strange. It was but a microsecond of time, right? When that thing hit my shin. So what they did with ART, it's a type of exposure therapy, had me reliving that microsecond. I probably spent 18 hours in that moment.
You gotta be kidding me. That's stupid.
Right,
That is.
because what do you know? It wasn't getting better. We kept trying again and again and again from 9 different angles, 9 ways to Sunday. I keep reliving this unbelievable intense moment again and again. So what do you know? My symptoms got worse, not better. And it was stuff like that where like, there's got to be a better
So
way
I
than this.
legit to that. Think of this: you have a broken leg. You go see a doctor, take an X-ray, and they go, "Okay, you got a broken leg. Go. How about run up that hill and come back?" Oh, now no longer a broken leg, now it's a flayed leg. Now you have this bone, the tibia, sticking out through the skin. Good plan. Good plan. I just,
Well,
I,
it's a big reason. I still consider it a blessing because it's why the show got started. You know,
and you
it's
can
like
help people, right?
there's got to be a better way.
And this is, I mean, in that sense, you and I are the same. We've been through interesting experiences, and we're trying to help people. We use what we got, right?
Use what we got. Well, the power of telling your story, the power of turning a shit sandwich into something that's good. You know, taking the bad and making something good out of it. It, that's the power of getting through and resolving your trauma, because then you can tell the story of survival and somebody else goes, oh yeah, I went through something similar, and yeah, it affected me similar, and you survived. Well, that's good, because I was just thinking about eating a bullet. Maybe I'll just keep going for one more day and I'll try one more thing.
So
And
I'd like
that's,
one thing, if I may.
yeah,
The reason I called my podcast Brain Hope Reality: no hope, no life. When my mother lost her hope, that's when she was gone.
yeah.
So those kind of your show and some of the procedures I do, hopefully, should give people real hope. Not kind of crazy bullshit hope, but real hope. That you can actually do something, you can help somebody, get treated, don't give up, we'll get to you.
Somebody made a comment in the comment, Richard Lambert, and he's right. I don't know if you were aware of this when it hit the news, but I testified in Ottawa because of some of the people that were coming to me on the side, that they were offered medical assistance in dying, so assisted suicide by the
Oh,
government instead of help.
killing me with that stuff. You guys in Canada, that's like crazy. So let me
Well, it's a mess.
can I tell you what I read? I mean, this is it absolutely drove me crazy considering my mother's death. In Belgium, there was an explosion, terrorist explosion. They exploded half of the classmates, like 16-year-olds. So 5 years later, one kid had severe PTSD, and they before she had euthanasia, right, at 23 years old, and she was on 11 different drugs, and she said, "I wish there were some other treatments for PTSD than drugs." She was put to sleep next month after that. That was in March of 2023. Can you believe
And
that?
that was in Canada?
No, that was in Belgium.
In
But Canada
Belgium.
is planning on embracing it wholesale. Before you say euthanasia to me for cancer, I'm all about that. That makes sense. When I'm a pain doc, I get it. But before you say it's untreatable, can you try other things? That's all I'm asking.
It's unbelievable to me that a doctor will kill somebody for something that's treatable because they don't know what the treatment is.
But that's all
It's
they
like,
know.
how come me, as a one-man show, can find these treatments, and these doctors will kill somebody because they can't even Google treatment. Like they're not even trying.
Oh, you're killing me. You're 100% right. I mean, there's no debate. Well, think of the guy with hand washing, right? Women are dying. The children are dying. No washing the hands. What the hell?
Well, do you know where the term blowing smoke comes from?
No. Oh God.
And
I've
this is why
heard of it.
I don't have a lot of faith in mainstream medical system. Um, so it was thought for a while that that there was a way to cure drowning. So if somebody drowns on the beach, what they did, they had a bellows. You know, the bellows, they blows smoke
Yeah,
or blows air to get your fire going.
yeah.
So they'd have a pack of cigarettes, like break glass in case of an emergency. So like a pack of cigarettes that you weren't supposed to touch, and all these bellows. And if somebody's drowns, they'd take them out of the water. And this isn't that long ago. They'd take them out of the water. They'd light up the cigarette, pull a bunch of smoke into the bellows, shove it up their butthole, and blow a bunch of smoke in it. And what do you know? Sometimes it would revive you. Yeah, you stick something up my butt, I'm probably going to get revived. But they figured, look, it works. And
You know,
that's where blowing smoke up my butt, where that saying comes from.
you know what? I
That's
don't
science, baby.
know where to go with that, but well, we are getting. To be fair, we're making progress. Besides stuff I do, I think the good thing about the internet, like shows like yourself, you can actually spread awareness and people look at it. So I think people should ask for more. Things should
Yeah.
work quicker. They should be more effective. They should be easy to accept. Like the stuff you went through sounds absolutely horrible. And compliance rate with exposure therapy is maybe on a good day 15%. The stuff, my acceptance stuff I do, 100%. You lie down, you're done. You
Yeah,
don't.
I was made privy to the internal statistics at the OSI clinic, and whatever they call success. So you have to put it in air quotes, success rate was 12 to 15%, 12 to 16%. And that's depending on how generous they were about calling something a success, right? Well, there's got to be a better way than 12 to 16%. And then here we are talking about SGB and ketamine, where it's got to be north of 80%, I'm going to guess.
That's true. But you know what placebo is?
Yes.
Efficacy, 30%.
Yeah. Yeah. So placebo can outdo what happens at the OSI clinic. Treatment. Yeah.
Well, together, I think, and I really appreciate having. Maybe would you mind being on my podcast?
Of course I would.
I would love that. I think we'll have a great chat. You can follow in footsteps of Devon, which is pretty big shoes to fill, but I'm sure we can do it.
Well, I'm going
Uh,
to be in Ottawa in at the end of the month here doing a speaking gig. They're flying me over. Physicians for Life is having me as a guest speaker, so I won't be too far from Chicago.
well, if you
But
can come,
we could do it like this too.
no, either way. I mean, I have a nice little studio. It's not nearly as nice as yours, but we have what we have.
I'm
Uh,
doing this out of a trailer right now while I'm building my house. I can look to my right, and there's the house that I'm building. Once that house is built, I'm going to have a proper studio here, and well, we'll have to fly you up and have you in studio. Oh, he's gone again. Gone, and he's back.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for everything.
Thanks, Dr. Lipov. I really appreciate your time today. Fantastic conversation. I was really moved by listening to what was published with Devon Larratt, the JTF veteran and arm wrestling superstar. There's just so much that you said that I'm like, yes, I was just screaming, yes, that's exactly right. And I think we're making progress. I think the global consciousness is starting to come online, and it's only been really the last 5 years that I've seen some good progress in this space, where people are getting more open to better treatments, to accepting that there is a better way. And thank you so much for the work that you do. I'm going to make, just stay on the line for a second. I'm going to close out the show, and then let's talk off air.
Okay, thank you.
All right. You're listening to Operation Tango Romeo, the trauma recovery podcast for veterans, first responders, and their families. Please support this show by sharing. Share like the sugar bear, because sharing is caring.